Thank you all for being here. Kramer Hall is delighted to make connections like this with members of the community of Hammonton and beyond. And we are just embarking on, this would be our third lecture, the second of which is being conducted by our very own friend and neighbor in Hammonton, Judge Nelson Johnson. So we thank you very much. We know you could be just about anywhere tonight.
Delighted to be here.
But you're here, and that means a lot to us. So tonight's program is really being sponsored by my colleague, Dan Douglas, who would like to say a few words about the judge. So thank you all.
Thank you. I'm not personally sponsoring it, just to be clear. I'm the director of the William J. Hughes Center for Public Policy, and we're delighted to sponsor this. And usually the introducer says nice things about the presenter. I was thinking about being in the same room with Nelson Johnson. It's not always a good thing. During the daytime, it's not always the best thing to be on the other side. But we're here to have our hometown boy, if you will, speak of his new book. But you know him, and the world knows him, frankly, for his best-selling book, the New York Times best-selling book, Boardwalk Empire. And if you've seen the TV series, I recommend the book. His second book is equally important, called North Side. It gave voice to the experience of African Americans in Atlantic City, and a much-needed voice. Tonight, Nelson's going to speak about his new book, Battleground New Jersey. It's an important part of New Jersey history, which is often cited, but not as clearly explained as Judge Johnson will do now. So without further ado, Judge Johnson.
Okay, I think this is going to work? Okay. Can everyone hear me? Yeah. Okay, good. I would be remiss if I didn't comment on two people. First, the lady who owned this building, Anna Bertino, was one of the shrewdest, most capable, and I'm going to keep it at that level. I mean, brilliant lady, and she had every angle covered all the time. And she was fascinating to work with. I had a chance to work with her a few times as a lawyer, and she was so impressive. So when I'm in this building, I think of her. And I know my former partner, John Burtman, could tell you a lot more stories about Anna Bertino, because he worked with her for many years on the hospital board. But she was a fascinating lady, and she employed hundreds of people over the years right here. And so it's amazing to see the transformation of this property, to go from a factory to a school, but both were dedicated to uplifting people, and she was really something. The other thing is being connected with Bill Hughes. The title, so to speak, of the prologue of my book is Power Doesn't Corrupt, It Reveals. And I really believe that. My mother told me that, and she told everybody, my kids are what they are by age 5. When they go off to kindergarten, they're going to be what they're going to be. And you can move the furniture around inside, but the building's built, and that's it. And I really believe that. And when you see people abuse power, it's pretty much they had the opportunity to be themselves, and their real self came forward. But if you look at Bill Hughes' career, his real self was a enlightened, hardworking, generous, dedicated public servant from the time he was a prosecutor in Cape May County to all the time that he served as congressman and became an ambassador. So, power doesn't corrupt, power reveals. There are many, many, many honest politicians, but what power does is give them the opportunity to be themselves. And so the corrupt ones are just showing, probably they were a nasty little kid, that cheated in kindergarten. The two people that are like the main characters of my book, the gentleman on the left is Frank Hague. I think he's probably the most successful 6th grade dropout ever. He died an extraordinarily wealthy man. 10 years, I won't say 10 years, about 7 years after his death, there was a dispute of one of the heirs when his estate was being probated, and his wife cashed some of the stock, and we're talking 60 years ago. His wife cashed some of the stock and gave the person $5 million to make him go away. So you get a feel for what he had to have had. And he did that all on the salary of $8,000 a year for 30 years. The gentleman to the right is Arthur Vanderbilt. Arthur Vanderbilt was a long-distant relation of the Vanderbilt family, the Commodore, but he wasn't wealthy starting out. He became quite wealthy through his law practice. And what I found fascinating about him, he's been a hero of mine probably for the past 35 years. He did so much to improve the court system in New Jersey that it's difficult not to stumble across his name, and if you're the least bit curious, you're going to learn about him. So these two people, what I didn't appreciate was just how deeply they hated one another. And once I understood that, and once I understood the interaction between the two of them leading up to the new Constitution, then I said, hey, there's really a story here that needs to be told. What I didn't know is that the story was even bigger than I realized, and my research uncovered some things that nobody knew, let's put it that way. No living people knew. But what I want to first show you is what interested these two people the most. And I refer to that as the hydra-headed monster. That is what New Jersey's court system looked like prior to 1947. What you have there is 18 separate courts with 18 separate rules for the court system. So what you have is every place you go, the rules are going to be a little bit different, and the rules were not adopted by the courts, they were adopted by the state legislature. The rules weren't updated or amended by the state legislature, they just adopted them and let them go forward in terms of what they might be. And over time, you had a system of serious chaos. You didn't have a separate branch of government. We think of the three branches of government, the executive, the legislature, the judiciary. Well, we really didn't have a separate branch of government. What we had was a judiciary controlled by the legislature. They made all the court rules, they appointed the judges, and the judges themselves were free to run for political office if they felt like doing it, and many of them did, and they were very actively involved in politics, and it was a system just ripe for abuse. And we'll talk about Frank Hague because he did abuse it. This is Arthur Vanderbilt as a young man. You could say that he had 4 careers. I spent a lot of time up at at the university where he graduated, Wesleyan in Connecticut, and all his personal archives are there. It's over 200 boxes. This was a person who knew he was making a place for himself in history, and he saved everything from the time he was in college right up until his death. And what I came away with, he had 4 careers. One, he was a practicing attorney with an international law practice. He had one of the best insurance defense firms in the nation, and he not only had clients all across the nation, but around the world. 2, he was a dedicated judicial reformer and worked at it very hard, became president of the American Bar Association, crisscrossed the United States by train and by airplane, talking at law schools, talking to state legislatures, talking to bar associations, saying, court system by and large across this nation is a mess, we've got to improve it. 3, he was what's the best way to put this? He was far more involved in politics than he ever wanted anybody to know. He was the hand behind the throne, so to speak, in Essex County politics for more than 20 years. And then 4th, and I'm drawing a blank here in terms of what I would call his 4th career. No, I'm not. He was a professor at NYU Law School for 30 years. And what I didn't appreciate, and some of my friends who are graduates of NYU Law School don't even fully appreciate, is that when you go and look at the building, it's named the Arthur T. Vanderbilt Law Center. He has such an impact on the school that they named the building after him. And they named the building after him before he was Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. He was a dynamo in terms of raising money. He taught there for 30 years. He was an extraordinarily capable person. That's him as a young man. That's him as a middle-aged attorney. This is his adversary, Frank Hague. Frank Hague was kicked out of school in the 6th grade, never went back. Frank Hague, what animated him was revenge. It was all about religious war. When the Irish came to Hudson County, they were treated like dirt. They were forced to do what I refer to as the 3 Ds, dirty, difficult, and dangerous work. And he grew up with a real strong, bitter taste in his mouth as to how the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant Republicans had treated his family and many families in Hudson County. And when he got power, he really did exercise it for a very long time. He was without question the most powerful person in New Jersey for at least 20 years. I would peg it probably at 27 years because he really manipulated the gubernatorial elections 9 times in a row. And so you multiply that by 3. He had the ear of the governor for 27 years and really had control of things. Into his 50s, and there are stories of into his 50s, he was still the kind of person that if you annoyed him and you got into a difficult situation, he would think nothing of punching you in the face. He was an amateur boxer, and he got very physical when he needed to. And so very different person, okay? Very different person from Arthur Vanderbilt. But they had some things in common, and I want to share this with you. Notwithstanding the enormous gap in their education, heritage, and style, they shared common traits. Neither had casual moments with anyone but trusted allies. Neither had time for opinions that didn't suit their agenda. Neither drank alcohol or had dalliances with women. Both exuded an intensity that either attracted people or repelled them. Both craved power to bend the world to their vision, and both were ruthless. Vanderbilt when he had to be, and Hague because he knew no other way. The trick to Hague's success was that he was able to get the Irish Catholics in Hudson County. What you got to try to remember is that in the first half of the 20th century, Essex County and Hudson County basically were 40% of the state's population. And so if you could control the vote in those 2 counties, you had a leg up in terms of deciding who was going to run the state. Well, Essex County was pretty much Republican at the time. Hudson County was totally dominated by the Democratic Party. And Hague was the kind of guy that he made sure everybody voted. And by that I mean whether you were dead or alive, you voted. Whether you're in a mental institution or not, you voted. Whether you lived in the area or not, you voted. And so what Hague would do, there's 21 counties in the state, and Hague would wait until all 20 county votes came in, and then it was sort of like, well, how many votes do we need? You know, and he would crank out the vote that was needed. On paper, he would crank it out. And where it all came to head, that really drove Vanderbilt crazy was in 1937. 1937 gubernatorial election in New Jersey is, by many people's perspective, the most notorious, the craziest election of a governor in the state of New Jersey's history. And I want to share with you what happened there. Newark lawyer Arthur Vanderbilt was furious. He knew that Jersey City Mayor Frank Hague would do anything to control the New Jersey governorship, but this, with 20 of 21 counties reporting, Essex County Republican Lester Klee was leading by more than 84,000 votes. Finally, long after everywhere else had reported, the vote out of Hudson County had Democrat Harry Moore besting Klee by nearly 130,000 votes. The numbers were bogus. The math said it all. If 90% of all eligible voters were registered and 90% of them had voted, Jersey City could have produced at most 119,000 votes. Instead, they totaled 145,000 votes. It was fraud beyond the Republicans' worst fears. Klee had been blindsided in a street fight, and he demanded a recount. Given who did the counting, Moore's margin held up. Litigation ensued. A nightmare followed. Every step of the way, as the Republicans fought to expose what a sham the vote count had been, they were met by a Hague judge or Hudson County Election Board official erecting one obstacle after another. Proof of election fraud was overwhelming. Dead people had voted. Patients in mental hospitals had voted. Even a rabbi who had moved to Massachusetts 3 years earlier had voted. His affidavit confirmed that he hadn't. Yet the court ruled the evidence wasn't enough to grant clear hearing to present testimony. As November became December and then January, Lester Klee saw his victory slipping away. In desperation, the Republican legislature appointed an investigative committee. It reaped only frustration. All the while, Mayor Hague was wintering in Florida. Finally, after months of stalling and a mere 7 days before Inauguration Day, longtime Hague pal Chief Justice Tom Brogan formally dismissed Klee's appeal, finding no basis for fraud and leaving no path for relief. The proxy war of Moore v. Klee was over. Hague won. Vanderbilt ceded. Worse still, the law meant nothing. And so this was a situation where he stole the election in plain view and nobody could do a darn thing about it. That was the kind of power that he had. That was 1937. And this is a political cartoon. The horseshoe takes care of its own. I'm going to backtrack a moment. Again, going back to how the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant Republicans treated the Irish, as the Irish population began growing in Jersey City and in Hudson County and were really becoming a force, the Republicans still had control, and what they did was created a district called the Horseshoe. And so you had, I think at the time there was 8 districts, but they finagled you call it gerrymandering, they finagled the boundary lines of the district to shape this weird looking thing that looked like a horseshoe, and they stuck all the Irish into it so that they could elect at most one person. And if they had been spread out, they could have elected a lot more. And so the horseshoe takes care of its own was their way of saying, we're going to keep on fighting until we get control. This is Hague with his puppet governor. Harry Moore was elected governor 3 times. He was the only Protestant that Hague was ever close to, but he was close to him because Moore was a real glad-hander, not a whole lot between the ears, but a very friendly, affable guy, dressed well, spoke well, and Hague could control him. So he was elected governor 3 different times. This is Hague's power. Also was national. He was vice chairman of the Democratic National Committee. This is a picture with him and Roosevelt. I always find this picture fascinating. I found this in the Jersey City Library. This is one of the few pictures where you will see FDR visibly holding a cane. He's got his left hand, he's hanging on to Harry Moore, and I'm not sure if he's willing to show the cane because he doesn't want to hang on to Hague or what's going on there. But they had a crazy sort of relationship. Now this is the person that really sent Vanderbilt into a dither and made Vanderbilt do all sorts of things that some of which he was able to hide and did succeed in hiding. This is Frank Hague Jr. Frank Hague Jr. attended Princeton. He attended William and Mary. He attended University of Virginia, and he didn't get a degree from any of them. He was named, despite the fact that he never graduated from anything. This is him in his robes, and his father had him named to the Court of Errors and Appeals, which at the time was sort of like our Supreme Court today. You had the Supreme Court in New Jersey, and then you had the Court of Errors and Appeals over top of that, and there was the Court of Last Resort. And you have this guy who, by everyone's report, really wasn't that bright. You had him sitting on the highest court. Well, this made Vanderbilt crazy. And Vanderbilt engaged in something that I'll touch on very quickly, but you'll have to take my word for it. Is there anybody in here who during the time they were in college read the book called The Boss, The Hague Machine in Action? It was a famous book for a very long time. And college professors to this day will still refer you to it in certain chapters of it to let you know what the 1950, let's say the first half of the 20th century, what the corrupt urban political machine looked like. Read that book and you'll see what it looked like. Well, what people can't appreciate, and I learned, and when I stumbled across it amazed me, was the books of fraud. The book was co-written by Arthur Vanderbilt, together with the named author, David Dayton McKean, who was a professor from Dartmouth. And Vanderbilt was so determined that he was going to bring Frank Hague down after his son had gotten appointed to the bench, that he engaged in a really underhanded move and helped write a book that is just filled with cherry picking. I won't call it lies, but he really distorted the record of Frank Hague. And to this day, now we're talking 70 years later, because the book was published in 1940. To this day, it's impossible, I think, for Hague's name to ever be rehabilitated in the public. He really wasn't a bad mayor. He really was a very effective mayor. Was he ruthless and difficult to deal with? Yeah. Did he deliver to his constituents? Yeah. Because how do you keep power for 30 years if you aren't delivering? You can't steal that kind of power for that period of time. He built a hospital. And I discussed it in the book, that was the first experiment in universal health care, free universal health care in the United States. And for about 25 years, if you lived in Hudson County and if you became ill, you went to the if you were going to deliver a baby, you went to the Margaret Hague Hospital. That was the maternity hospital named after his mother, and there were several other hospitals. But if you showed up on their doorstep, all they needed to know was that you were a resident of Hudson County and you had free health care. And it wasn't sustainable long term. I don't think it ever, but he wasn't thinking that way. He was thinking about, how do I take care of my residents? And for 25 years, he had a free hospital that served everyone. So he really wasn't as bad a guy as the book portrays him, but the book did such a good job of smearing him that it stayed. Now, I tell people Arthur Vanderbilt is one of my heroes, and he's still one of my heroes, but this is the hero of the book. This is a gentleman from Haddonfield. This is Alfred Driscoll. And Alfred Driscoll was elected governor in 1946. And I think what happened was he got on the scene, he looked at what had happened, because there had been many efforts to try to reform the Constitution. Everybody knew the court system was a mess. Everybody knew it was corrupt. Everybody knew you really weren't going to get a fair shake if you didn't have somebody who had influence with the judge. You knew you were going to be in trouble. Everybody knew the system was a mess. He knew that. He gets onto the scene, looks at all the failures, and I think what he recognized is that people weren't talking to one another. Vanderbilt, despite the fact that he was a bitter rival of Hague, he never reached out to meet with him, and Hague had no time for anybody. He was quite content with the system, and this gentleman comes on the scene. He's much younger than the other two. He's about 25 years younger than Hague. He's about 15 years younger than Vanderbilt, and he tells Vanderbilt, go off to one side. I'm going to make a deal with Hague. Well, that made Vanderbilt crazy, but he did make the deal, and the deal resulted in a constitutional convention, which was at Rutgers University in the summer of 1947. This is him at the convention. I'm not going to share with you his speech he made at the convention or the speech he made at his inaugural, but almost Lincoln-esque. He made two speeches that I just think are astounding. I had the chance to, I've reread them many times, and I had a chance to hear them. At his inauguration and at the convention, he made speeches each of less than 2,000 words. I mean, it doesn't take much more than 10 minutes to read them, and they're just powerful, packed with, and he was able to motivate the politicians around him to, let's change things. But he wasn't able to change things without doing the deal with Hague, and that did involve releasing money that his predecessors had held back and kept from Hudson County, that did involve appointments of various people to different positions, that did involve changes in some laws that were clearly benefited from Hudson County. Some of them still benefit him today. But his attitude is, I got to look at the big picture. So if I got to swallow some distasteful things to make a better thing happen, then I'm going to do that. And so he really is the hero of the book. He was a deal maker, and I have tremendous respect for him. This was the first Supreme Court. I could go through all the names, but suffice it to say that's Vanderbilt there in the center, despite the fact that he didn't know how to make a deal. He was the person pushing for reform for more than 20 years, and he clearly was the right guy to lead the new court, and he did a great job doing it. Everybody else in the picture is there pretty much because of politics. And I would say out of the 7, probably 5 of them were quite capable. The other 2 were just there because of politics. The guy sitting on the far right, his main qualification that he was former Democratic Party chairman of Hudson County and the state of New Jersey, and Frank Hague, one of them on the court. So he was on the court. Now this is what came out of, if you recall the Hydra-headed monster, where you had 18 separate courts. What you really had here was what we call a unified, integrated, centralized, pick whichever adjective you want, but a unified court system governed by one set of rules and predictability, accountability, impartiality, independence, a system working all the way from the Supreme Court right down to the municipal court, where everyone is answerable, everyone is accountable, no one can play games, no one can play politics, and it almost transformed the court overnight. This is a picture this is a cartoon of Arthur Vanderbilt. This was published in September of 1948 when the new court system went into effect. A few months before that and a few months after that, Driscoll proved his worth again. 8 different bills were passed by the legislature, because understand, when they reorganized government and they created a truly independent branch of the judiciary, that power had to come from someplace. And the power came from the legislature. And when the legislature woke up to what had happened, they started adopting bills to try to whittle down the courts so that they would have more control over the courts. And they passed 8 different bills. And Driscoll vetoed each and every one of them. And so he was really the person who made the new court system possible, but Vanderbilt was always the face of the court system, so to speak. So what are the takeaways from Vanderbilt versus Hague? Politicians come and go. The rule of law and an independent judiciary are indispensable to a free and civilized society. I say that because people need to know. We could be talking about a divorce. You could be talking about DWI. You could be talking about a boundary dispute between property owners. You could be talking about a deal that went bad between people in a corporation or a partnership. They need to know that when things go bad, that they can take their dispute to a place where it will be treated fairly. And if you look around the world, and if you have followed what is happening as the global economy expands, businesses are very uncomfortable going into a country if they don't know there's an independent judiciary, because they know their investment can be stolen from them. And so without independent courts, you're not going to have an efficient economy. Without an independent court, you aren't going to have people who are going to have faith in government. And Vanderbilt understood that. And Vanderbilt worked very hard for that, and made a huge change when the system flipped from probably one of the most corrupt to one of the best in the nation. Lawyers are the bulwark of our legal system. The rule of law, as we know it, cannot survive without them. I know that the legal system and lawyers have their critics. But what I have found over the years, and I've been looking at this for more than 30 years, if you look at the polls, what does the public think of lawyers generally? They're rated real low with, used car salesmen and everybody else. But if you look at the polls, what do you think of your lawyer? The polls are very high. Everybody loves their lawyer. They just don't like lawyers generally. Okay, power doesn't corrupt; it reveals. It revealed to Frank Hague that once he had power, he was going to get revenge, and he spent most of his adult life getting revenge. It revealed of Arthur Vanderbilt that he needed power so badly that he was willing to do some underhanded things. He did some things he shouldn't have done after he was on the court too, but they involved Hague and nobody else. He had a real problem with Frank Hague. His hatred for him was genuine, and he ruled on a case involving Frank Hague after he was on the Supreme Court when he clearly should not have. But again, I don't think anybody else in the court knew it, knew of the backstory, so to speak, in terms of what he had done with the book. He did take that secret to his grave, and I stumbled over it. And when I confronted his grandson, Arthur T. Vanderbilt II, with it, I got a groan, and then he said, "Well, you are a serious historian, and the truth is the truth, and so I'll just have to live with it." Change is hard. Reforming any institution requires persistence. Compromise is essential to achieving great reform. When leaders fail to compromise, society suffers. That's all I'm going to say. Just look around us today. If we can't figure out, and we're in a bad spot in American history right now, and I hope we're going to get past it. But if people don't figure out how to make compromises, we're really going to be spinning our wheels for a long time. And I don't know how much longer that's going to go on. But right now, we're spinning our wheels in this nation. And then paybacks are tough. Revenge can get ugly. Sometimes prejudice creates the very thing it fears. And again, when you give people a bad time while they're in the minority and they don't have the power to deal with you, you run the risk that when they get power, they might just decide that they're going to give you a bad time. And so what I hope you'll get a feel for is that these two gentlemen played a very big part in making New Jersey what it is today. I think Frank Hague made a lot of positive contributions, and Arthur Vanderbilt did as well. And I don't think it's likely we're going to see anybody like either one of them anytime soon. And I had much fun putting that all together, and I hope I give you a feel for what the book is about. Thank you.